So in the note, we start with a simple conceptual framework just to lay the foundation. Yeah, so we very closely followed the concepts developed by Naila Kabir and ICRW guidance as well. So this will probably look quite familiar to you. So I'll run through this quickly. So obviously, you first of all have to define what you mean by economic empowerment. So in the paper, we defined an economically empowered woman as a woman who is able to achieve the economic and non-economic goals she has set for herself and her family. And then we go on to define three interrelated concepts. So to achieve their goals, women require access to certain resources. So in the context of financial sector deepening or financial inclusion, there's obviously access to the financial services themselves, but also access to technology like mobile phones, knowledge and information around financial capabilities, and so on. Then to be empowered, women also need the agency to set and pursue their own goals and make their own choices. So that covers things like voice, the power women have vis-a-vis other decision makers like husbands or business partners, things like unpaid care burdens, mobility, and so on. And then achievements is the extent to which women are actually then able to achieve the goals they have set for themselves. So that could be, starting or growing a new business or securing employment in a desired sector. And also in there, you've got the resultant non-economic and subjective benefits, such as feelings of well-being and life satisfaction and so forth. And then underpinning all of those three A's are the broader set of structural factors and institutions. So we heard about some of those in the fireside chat. So you've got the social norms or the political and economic institutions, formal and informal, that influence what resources women can access and the level of agency they can exercise. So that's probably all fairly straightforward for a lot of you. I think in the guidance note, what we emphasize, though, is that there's not necessarily a simple linear pathway from, say, access to agency to achievements. So each of the three A's can interact in different ways, and you can also have positive and negative feedback loops between all three of those different A's. Great. So yeah, building on the conceptual model, in the rest of the note, we then present a 5-step methodology for measuring WEE. So in the first step, we suggest for any at the level of an individual project or intervention in your overall program, you develop an empowerment pathway. When you've done that, the second step is to define indicators for each step in that pathway. The third step involves developing a measurement plan where you set out your method, sources, samples, timing, responsibilities for those indicators. Fourth step, you then actually go out and collect the data. And then final step is around actually analyzing and using the WEE data. So that's either reporting to your donors and stakeholders, or also just using it internally to inform your own program decision making. So yeah, I think the paper may be the main innovation from the guidance note is around this idea of empowerment pathways. So in the next slide, I will just give you an example of that because that might not be familiar to people. Yeah, so our suggestion is, first step is to, for your particular project or intervention, map out the causal pathway, illustrating how your particular intervention or project is expected to contribute to improved WEE outcomes. So this can incorporate the three A's that we just talked about. And also, as we said, it's not a linear process. So the exact sequencing of those three A's may vary by your different projects. And you may have different, feedback loops involved. So I'll just give you illustrative hypothetical example. So let's suppose as part of your intervention, your program is going to support partner financial service providers to better incorporate women into product design processes. you might then see the partner FSP then revises an e-wallet savings product that they have, just to take an example. So they start to take into account better women's preferences and capabilities. The partner FSP then launches the revised e-wallet savings product. You then have women are then able to access and use that revised product. So that's our first element from our conceptual framework around access. Then you might hope to see that as a result, women have a safe space to save their income, which is then increasing their financial autonomy and their decision-making power. So that then gets into the agency. And then you might ultimately see that, or hope to see that, women are better able to achieve their economic goals. So that's the achievements. And then, as we said, you might have various feedback loops that happen, positive or negative. So in this case, you might see that as a result from that initial achievements, there's a further improvement in agency around improved self-confidence and decision-making power. And then that feeds back and creates a positive feedback loop to the achievements. So hopefully that just gives you an idea of what we mean by the empowerment pathways. And then the 3As you can also think about them in terms of the kind of conditions, or the preconditions that need to be in place in order for this logic to hold. So the idea would be, for each of these causal linkages, you would interrogate those and think about, well, what has to be in place already for that to happen? So if we take this example here, you might have certain assumptions around, or preconditions that need to be in place around women, for example, already have access to a mobile phone. Women have the necessary financial literacy, so that's also access. Women are going to have the mobility to meet with an agent, so that's getting into agency, and so on. So you can see how the A's, can also appear in the assumptions as well. So, how is this tool useful, you might be asking? I mean, from a project design perspective, I think mapping the empowerment pathway is going to provide project teams with a very systematic process for setting out, what specifically or what specific WEE results you are hoping to achieve through your particular project or intervention. What are the causal mechanisms involved? And then, really thinking deeply about the assumptions or conditions underpinning their logic and whether they are actually likely to hold in your context. And then from a measurement perspective, which is what we're talking about or focusing on today, this pathway then provides you with a project-specific framing for the subsequent WEE indicators, data collection, and analysis. So given that WEE is a very broad and complex concept, this hopefully will help you to focus in your indicators and your data collection on those aspects of WEE that are going to be most relevant for your particular intervention. I'm probably way out of time, am I, Jenny? So we started a bit late.
Yeah, if you don't mind just sort of going through this one a little bit quickly, but I think this is your last one, right? Yeah.
Yes, this is my last one. So then so that was the first step, and then we've got five other steps. I don't have time to go through all of these, so I'll just pick out a couple, and you can obviously read the guide. So the suggestion is, once you have the empowerment pathway, the idea is you can then develop WEE indicators for each box in that empowerment pathway. So then that will really, again, give you a systematic way of really testing that logic and seeing if it's breaking down, where is it breaking down, and testing those assumptions. I think another really important one when you're measuring WEE is, given the subjective nature of a lot of those concepts that we talked about at the start, I would really encourage people to use a combination of quantitative and qualitative indicators. And I think Justin was going to share a little bit of their journey around that. So I won't say too much more about that. Then once you've got all your indicators, then you can obviously think about how you're going to measure them. Again, just because it's very hard to measure, I would just encourage a triangulation of different methods and sources, again, using quantitative and qualitative kind of methods. There's also some really cool methods that you could try that aren't the usual ones around surveys and interviews. So there's some examples in the paper of games or experimental vignettes, which are really good at getting at some of those hard to measure aspects of WE. And then collecting the WE data itself. So when you look at the experience of trying to measure WE through things like survey and interview questions, it's very easy for you to get biased results or to overlook the role of women, for example, in surveys. Just really taking time to do a really well-designed and pre-tested questionnaire and interview guide is really important. And even thinking about the real details around your enumerator recruitment and the where and when of data collection as well can also is really critical, because even small aspects there can bias your results when you're trying to measure WE. For step 5, I definitely don't have time for that. I wasn't even going to attempt that. So you'll definitely have to read the guidance note if you want more on that. So let me stop there.
Thank you so much, Gareth, for setting the scene for us. There are a couple questions in the chat if you don't mind taking a look while we move to the next speaker. Ravi, you're going to be screen sharing, correct? So you can go ahead. Great. Should be right at the bottom, a little arrow. Working. Okay, great. Go ahead.
Sorry, did you want to take a couple questions first, or?
No, I think we should move, and then we'll try to come back to some questions at the end. Thanks.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. And thanks, Gareth. It was great to hear sort of that methodology. And thank you, Jenny and FinEquity, for having us here. I'm Ravi Manikant. I'm Director of Women's Entrepreneurship and Financial Inclusion at CARE USA. I had a lot of experience in women-centered design and human-centered design. And the thing about design is that it's intrinsically connected to the measurement frameworks. And so while I am not a full-on measurement expert like my panelists here, we do have a strong measurement team that has been looking at our work more meticulously. And I'm excited to share today some of our latest thinking on how to measure financial health for women, specifically women-led MSEs. And so we're looking for feedback and reactions as it's hot off the press. So moving into sort of broadly speaking, this looks very similar to what Gareth just presented, in fact. And so CARE 78 years, 109 countries with a focus on women and girls. And we really look at women's economic empowerment in terms of justice. And what that means is that it's shifting the language a bit away from empowerment, as that implies that the power kind of rests with women rather than the power resting with structures or norms that dictate power in society. And so women's economic justice really focuses on the fulfillment of women's fundamental human rights to economic resources and the power to make decisions that affect their lives. And so similar to Garrett's 3 A's, we sort of have a, sort of a 3-pronged structure where we look at building agency, which is some of the stuff that we're really used to measuring: confidence, self-esteem, knowledge, skills, access, usage. But we're also looking at relations and structures. And those are both really important to CARE. We think that, in relations, we're talking about what's happening in the household that's affecting control and decision-making, what's happening with the husband that's impacting the woman's ability to use her money. We're looking at social networks, how they are positive, how they are negative, what's happening with the market actors that allow her to access markets or not. And again, focused on the women-led business in this context. And then third is the structure, and so those are the norms, that's the customs and the values that allow her to move or not move, that allow her to dictate that she must do all the household duties. Those are the laws and the procedures and policies that don't allow her to inherit any assets when someone passes away, so she doesn't have ways to get to use assets as collateral, for example. And so those structures are equally important. And this also includes the financial service providers that we work with to deliver a lot of products and services. And so at CARE, we believe the three must kind of go together to actually achieve transformative impact. And that's sort of key to our work. So I'm going to focus on Strive Women. Our actual full model of women's entrepreneurship, we're looking at women-led micro and small businesses, those who have 2 to 10 employees and have been in business for 2 years. And so we leverage our local presence, or strong local presence, to form partnerships and deliver a holistic set of services for women-led MSEs. So the Ignite program, which isn't mentioned here, this ran from 2020 to 2023 and was funded by the MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth. And it delivered a holistic set of services to grow women-led businesses and impacted 150,000 entrepreneurs, unlocked 155 million in loan capital by working with our local financial service partners and by designing specifically for women. So really thinking about what are women's unique barriers. And so leveraging that great experience, we have a follow-on program called Strive Women. And here we're really focusing on financial health. And that's sort of the pivot. And I think that's going to be interesting in terms of what we're starting to measure as we look at financial health. And similarly, so financial health as opposed to just business growth or financial access and usage, and so which is what we were doing previously. And what we see here is that we've got kind of 4 pillars. We're looking for women-led MSEs to grow. That's better access to better capital and non-financial services, sort of a package of non-financial and financial services. We're looking to impact and build capability on the supply side, which is to really make sure FSPs are better equipped to design for women and that they can serve women better. In the third bucket, you can see we've got some innovations to deepen specifically for women. So looking at gender norms, childcare trials. So we're going to have some solutions and looking at, how can we get childcare to women? We're looking at green business. And then in the fourth bucket, we're really more intentionally building ecosystems so that this set of services can be supported in the long term for women-led MSEs. So that's Strive Women. So we started with the question, what is financial health? And I'm not going to read all the things on this slide, but one of the things that was really interesting was that financial resilience was sort of a through line for all of the definitions that are out there. So you've got, big the major organizations, UNCDF, FHN, Financial Health Network, CFI has a definition, and they're all different, and that's okay. But I think what is important is that the core to this is the financial resilience, or the ability to withstand shocks, cope with any emergencies. And also you'll see control and confidence as trends in these definitions. And the other thing that you'll see is that some of these definitions drew heavily on the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is a US-based protection bureau. And it really looks at resilience for today and for the future. And so we drew off of that to build our framework. And just kind of a final point on kind of doing the research around this. So we looked at sort of this range of financial health frameworks and realized there was a lot of work being done and measured in that personal financial management, financial capability. That's sort of that agency bucket where we see a lot of indicators, where we see a lot of measurement happening. But kind of as you keep going down the line, you don't see as much happening. But what we really wanted to do was to say, okay, we're gonna do that. We're gonna look at resilience. We're gonna have something comprehensive and go gender specific. And so I think that's where we're really trying to lean in. And I'm sure there are gender specific elements in each of these frameworks, but just really wanting to call out what makes our measurement framework more gender specific. And so that kind of brought us to a high level financial health framework. And here what we're looking at is 3 different themes. So that's financial resilience, confidence and control, and quality of life. And these are really important for women-led MSEs. And how we've divided them is thinking about what's happening in the present and what are we planning for in the future. And so I'll go into some of those indicators, but with financial resilience, we're looking at the proactively planning for any cash flow variability. We're looking at the ability in the future to be able to actually to use some strategy to withstand a shock, to recover from it. In confidence and control, we're really looking at what do they have the confidence to make those decisions, whether they be joint or individual, depending on what is optimal. And in the second piece, we're really looking at more markets and more business growth opportunities, which men tend to have, but women don't. And then in quality of life, we're looking at time management and stressors, as well as just being able to look at improved mental health in the future. And these are all things that we found from Ignite in the first round that were really important, that we feel like we needed to lean in for various reasons. But so they're women-centered, they're holistic, unique for women, and they really this really focuses on the present and the future. So I'm going to go into some details around the indicators, and I apologize, there's like no real good way to put indicators on a slide ever in the world. So good luck if you ever figure it out. But so hopefully you can see these different, so I'm going to go theme by theme and sort of point out a little bit about what makes it sort of really focused on women, based on our learning that we had in the first program and what we're doing now. So in the first one, financial resilience, some of the examples of the activities, this is not comprehensive, include skills building or coaching. These are things that you're familiar with, as well as women-centric design. So how are we designing with digital and financial service providers to be able to make it easier to access and use the products and services out there? And our sub-themes here, you can see those. But really what I want to point out is that we're looking at what's happening now, skills right now, but also planning ahead. So business for the business and planning ahead for financial resilience. And in terms of improved digital capabilities, we really feel that's something where women have not had enough focus. And so that's where we're going to be really emphasizing so that we can make sure that they're not left behind in the digital economy. And then in terms of financial resilience, we are talking about, instruments that look like, insurance or savings, being able to have 3 months reserve in an account for your business, having diversified revenue sources. So those are all kind of options for having some financial resilience in the future. If you go to the confidence and control, so if you go from the first example of activities to the second, you can see that now we're kind of widening what our activities become. And again, I'm talking a little bit about how you design as well to match these needs, right? So we're widening now to talk more about relations. And so we've got behavior change campaigns. What does that look like with the rest of the community? We've got engagement with men and households, more networks, more digital and physical markets. So really looking at the relations and potentially some structures in digital and physical markets that could help them grow. And this all came, I think, a lot from Ignite, where in Ignite, we didn't measure as much decision-making. We measured a lot of business growth, business performance, financial product performance. Decision-making was harder as it tends to take place at the household level, but we're leaning into that a little bit more. We also know that networks are incredibly important for women-led MSEs to be able to troubleshoot, to solve their problems. And in this case, what was really interesting about the research that Danielle Hopkins was helping us do around financial health was that men tend to have more vertical networks, which means that they have networks that lead to business opportunities, whereas women tend to have horizontal networks, which are more like family and friends, which don't lead to business opportunities necessarily. And so we want to be really intentional about the type of networks that women have to help them get to the business opportunities that we want them to have. And also looking at access to markets. So one of the things that came out of Ignite was that we need so much more intentional work around access to markets. And then if you're in Pakistan, there are severe mobility issues. So how are you going to get physically to different markets? Or there are severe digital access and capability issues for women specifically. So how are you going to access that digital market? And so we really want to lean into that a little bit more and understand how we can either build the digital capability or continue to get them to physical markets, as we did even in Pakistan, where they were exposed to different suppliers and market information. And then kind of traditional sales and employees growth definitions. If we move to the third one, and this is the final one, I promise, Jenny, we're going to talk about quality of life. Quality of life subjective. All that really matters is that, that we are going to actually dig into quality of life and try to understand what this means for women, specifically in the different contexts, and that they understand it and that they self-identify with it and they understand how to improve their quality of life. But what I think we really learned in Ignite is that, just to kind of make a final point on this, is like time poverty is something that we're constantly talking about for women, but we're doing very little about in terms of solutions. And so we're really excited about Strive Women and the opportunity to actually test some childcare solutions, but also really think about how do we reduce that time poverty and the stress around that time poverty and actually have them enjoy life. So instead of adding more and more record-keeping trainings to their life, how do we intentionally design to improve their quality of life? Because that is actually really critical to their full financial health. So those are some of the indicators that we're looking at. And we have a lot of measurement activities coming up in the next few years. We'd love for you to all to kind of, connect with us and start to think about how we can work on some of these together. But really excited to be able to share that with you all and hope to get some feedback on this. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ravi. Yeah, sorry, we're short on time, but I appreciate your presentation. And I want to hand it over to Justin now to talk about women's world banking. Let's see. I've got the presentation up, so please go ahead, Justin.
All right, thank you very much, Jenny. Thank you to my previous presenters, Gareth and Ruthie, and as well, thank you everyone for joining. I find that talking about measurement and research, it doesn't always engage everyone, but I feel like the fact that you're here, you're a receptive audience, so I'm looking forward to talking about everything here with you guys. I want to start talking about Women's World Banking's framework, which is just a bit different from the other frameworks that have been presented, but there still is a lot of overlap. We just take a different way of operationalizing the same concepts. We've adapted the Martha Chen model, which is a 4-pillar model of cognitive, the most frequently seen indicators fall under material change, which is like change in income, assets, those kinds of things that are fairly easy to measure. But we also include cognitive change, perceptual change, and relational change. And in structuring it this way, we structured it this way partially because we're tied to the work of our advisory services, who we evaluate to understand the impacts of the solutions that they've designed and implemented. And in doing so this way, we're able to better measure or better match to the theories of change that they develop while they're developing the solutions. That theories of change help theoretically underpin the expected changes that we would see when we're implementing any sort of solution or product or new service or anything like that. In doing it like this, there is one significant strength, which is where we find high impact along these measurements, like these indicators, we can immediately scale it. When we have a particular savings project or a payment systems project that we're seeing is effective in improving some aspects of women's economic empowerment, we don't have to wait to advocate for it and find other organizations that want to integrate our learnings into their services. We could just take the expertise that we've gained with our advisory team, and then they can just apply it directly in their work with another financial service provider or with the same financial service provider in scaling it. One of the drawbacks of this approach, we're a bit advisory led, where we're trying to do research. We're known for our advisory work. So financial service providers, other institutions, when they want to engage with Women's World Banking, they want to do so because they want to leverage that expertise in product design. They're not always there and interested in having their work measured. It's an ongoing conversation that we have with partners. We try to engage them early on. We want to measure this. We want to do an impact evaluation. We want to withhold the solution from groups of people. We want to randomly select who is going to not receive a solution. Coming up with justifications for that. It is depending on the partner and the familiarity with impact evaluations. It can require more convincing, or sometimes some organizations are quite on board with it. Jay, we can go to the next slide. This is just some of the indicators that we have. As has been said, it's difficult to go through indicators on a slide, but you can just see that we have income, resources, basic needs, under material change, and some of the other indicators that have come up in the other models that fit within those 4 pillars. Yeah, go next slide. Okay. So one of the things that Women's World Banking is seeking to measure, or is including in our research agenda for 2024 and beyond, is this concept of when to measure women's economic empowerment. And this is something that Gareth alluded to when he was talking as well. Commonly, what people are doing when they're measuring WE is taking a baseline survey, and then a year or a year and a half later, taking an endline survey, and then just comparing the differences that you see between those 2 points in time and between like a treatment and a control group. But what we don't fully understand are the time horizon impacts of WE. And by that, I mean, do impacts and like the way we would measure them, do they accumulate linearly? Or do they accumulate and then stay accumulated, or do they continually accumulate? Or do they kind of blip up where they're measurable and then they dissipate and you can't measure them anymore? In the case of the former, you could kind of measure at any point and then keep measuring into the future, and you'll continuously see greater impacts. With the temporary impacts, if you wait a year and you do your measurements, it's possible that your project had an impact, but you just missed it entirely. We would love to see sustained impacts in our projects, but it doesn't mean that a project with just a temporary impact is unsuccessful. Even those temporary impacts can be quite beneficial, especially depending on how they're timed. Another component to this time horizon is that the shape of the impact, which is it linear? In which case, are you seeing, if you measure after a year, you have like 5% impact. After 2 years, you have 10% impact from baseline. In which case, if you keep measuring out, you'll continuously see that accumulation. Or does, if you measure it after 1 year, maybe those impacts accrued, and then like that's as much as you're going to see. In the case of the former, if you keep measuring, then you will see increases. In the case of the latter, if you keep measuring, just that base impact will be what's persistent. And if you didn't know the shape of your impacts and you did that baseline and endline measurement, you wouldn't be able to, if you don't understand this trajectory of impact, you won't know if this particular indicator that you're measuring has plateaued at whatever you're saying the impact is, or if you would expect it to continually accrue. So this is just something we're also looking to explore. And then lastly, heterogeneous impacts across indicators. And by this, I mean, it's really complicating it, which is different indicators may accrue at different times, and they may be these different things. Like you may see financial resilience increasingly increase over time. You may see savings balances that continuously increase over time. But something like household decision-making may be something that takes like 2 years to accrue. So if you measured it after 1 year, you don't measure it. But if you had measured it 2 years later, you pick up on that impact. Where at that 1 year measurement, you did pick up on the impacts from the other indicators. So it's quite complicated. Well, I don't think we'll ever figure out perfectly when is the best time to measure every single indicator. But just getting a better sense of this, I think, is something that's of a lot of interest among the research team here. Okay. Just some quick lessons. Generally, I'll quickly go through like what makes a good research question or good survey question. We want something that's interpretable, something that has a good distribution of responses with a low level of non-response, something that's consistently measurable over time when there's no impacts, and something that does shift when there is an impact. These is just general guidelines of good questions, good survey questions that we seek to follow. Sometimes we've had success, sometimes we've had less success in designing our surveys. One particular question that we recently changed was we asked, over the past 30 days, how much have you saved? We found that we were trying to then interpret this there was confusion even amongst the research team. Did we intend to say, how much did you deposit in total over 30 days, the past 30 days? Or are we saying over the past 30 days, how much did your savings balance change? You know, in the case of the former, somebody could have deposited the equivalent of, you know, $100 over the course of a month. They may say $100, but if that person interpreted it as the latter, and they had spent a bunch of spent money, they may even say like, actually, I saved like negative $50, even though maybe these two people had deposited the same amount. So it's not a great research question. We have to improve how we phrased it. I quickly also want to give a plug for the Finequity-led Women's Economic Empowerment collab. There was originally a working group, which we developed a report that is available on the Finequity website that provides an overview of how we developed our theory of change for measuring women's economic empowerment, with the idea of having sort of like a cross-organizational harmonization of indicators. And now we are testing, like under a collab, which has a handful of organizations, of which Women's Rural Banking is one. We're testing survey questions. I wanted to just highlight some of the questions, why we included them or didn't. One of the reasons we didn't include questions, and this is for like just general survey methodology, we were testing this as part of an end-line survey. And so we needed to match some questions where there was overlap with our baseline question, like our baseline wording. So maybe it was similar, but we didn't include it because we need to be measurable from baseline to end line. But there were some quite valuable questions that we've included that we're looking forward to turning over our collected data over to the IPA technical assistance team and getting overall feedback on everyone's, all the organizations who are participating. Just looking at the success of that. And I hope that everyone finds it interesting when the final recommendations come out. And then very quickly, lastly, I know I'm really short on time. I want to highlight that women's rural banking is also shifting to mixed methods approaches, primarily because quantitative research for finding doesn't satisfactorily answer the how or the why of a program's impacts. And it also assumes a perspective on women's economic empowerment. And by that, I mean, we're putting our own sort of value judgments on what's important within a setting that we would define as empowerment. And by including qualitative components, we're better able to overcome those assumptions. One particular case, an example of that we just recently had a big discussion about internally, was around women's control over resources. Not just is a woman's control over resources universally a good thing? Maybe they don't want to have particular control over a resource, in which case, like, forcing them to make decisions might not be necessarily a good thing. But also the framing of it in terms of, is it at the expense of somebody else? So if a woman is now making a decision on some sort of spending, is it necessary? Are we assuming that it means she's taking away decision-making power from someone else? When that may not necessarily be the case. It could just be something like she had wages coming in, and then she was just spending it freely, but now she has a higher salience in her tracking her savings or tracking her income, and now she's more purposefully deciding on what to spend it on. That's an example of, you know, she's increasing her decision making, but she's not necessarily at the expense of someone else. And this is something that kind of came about through including a qualitative approach. If anyone has any questions about moving to including qualitative methods as a way of supporting quantitative methods and vice versa, I'm very happy to engage in that, but I know that we're basically out of time. So I'll stop there. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much. And if you have questions for Justin or any of the speakers, please go post them in the chat. We probably will go over just a few minutes, but I have one final speaker, Dr. Rachel Heath from the University of Washington, WEE-DiFine board member, and she's going to, yes, be sharing her screen. Thanks so much. Go ahead.
And is that full screen? Can you all see the just the slides?
It's not full screen. Maybe if you
Okay.
can. Yeah.
Yeah, let me, I always have to
Bigger.
remember what the full screen is. Oh, there we go. Okay, great. Hi, well, thank you to the organizers and all of you for being here. I'm excited to tell you briefly about a project on digital financial services and women's economic empowerment, and I'll discuss the measurement also, given the topic of this theme. As Jenny mentioned, I'm Rachel Heath, and this is joint work with Emma Riley at the University of Michigan. So, I mean, we've been talking all about women's economic empowerment. And so, that's the context that motivates this project as well. And in particular, we're thinking about women's ability to control funding. And that's an important way that women are able to, what we call enact their preferences, to kind of, have household allocations reflect what they want. There's some evidence, including from earlier work by Emma, that digital financial services is a way to help women control income. It kind of helps them keep their income secure. But with that said, there's pretty big gender gaps in how much digital financial services are used, and that's both in kind of the use of mobile money overall. So in sub-Saharan Africa, 37% of women use mobile money compared to half of men, and even when women use it, it's not for things that might really bolster this control of income channel. In particular, only a third of women who use mobile money are saving with it, compared to 60% of men. So, things like sending remittances are important, but in this project, one of the questions we ask is building up savings important for kind of including boosting women's economic empowerment. So the context we're going to do that is a randomized controlled trial joint with BRAC. We're going to work with 750 women that are microfinance clients and ask whether increasing their use of mobile money increases, their control over income and more generally their empowerment and their overall welfare. Just a few details in the experiment, and included 152 microfinance groups that were and 7 branches of BRAC in Tanzania, and they're all women clients, and they used it's an individual loan, and they were using it for a business. Kind of similar to the overall sub-Saharan African context. The vast majority of these women had used mobile money before, but as I mentioned, kind of sending remittances was the, by far the most common thing that women were doing. Only 20% had, kind of used it in their business, allowing customers to pay, and 15% saved with it. So the treatment here is going to be repayment of these loans through mobile money, and that has a couple prongs. Women they received training on how to make their loans with mobile money. So they learned kind of how to do that. And they were encouraged to make repayments on, their current and their future loans using mobile money. So it wasn't kind of, the most extreme treatment you could do where, there's no longer any ability to repay with cash, but there was that repayment. There was actually a small fee, to a 1% fee for making repayments with mobile money. And in this context, you might think that, if there's repayment with mobile money, there's no more need for group meetings. In this context, the women kind of kept going to the group meetings, so that we didn't kind of change that aspect of the experience. So the control group had repayment with cash and had those same weekly group meetings. So the results I'm going to show you on the next slide aren't driven by kind of changes in contact with their frequency of contact with their group. Though I will to foreshadow, I will kind of mention that we actually see increases in social cohesion, and maybe an important use of mobile money is that it kind of shifts group meetings from kind of being all about kind of counting money and that kind of transactional aspect to kind of, allow kind of a more fundamental bonding process with the women. So, take-up was pretty high. It seemed like women like this. within 9 months of the treatment, 64% of the treatment group had made a repayment, at least one, with mobile money. And it wasn't usually that they just did once to try it. An average of 8 payments were made. So it seems like they, they kind of, they wanted to do it. So on the results, so we kind of have, I show you 3 key outcomes here. The first, and they're all measured in standard deviations in this graph. So the first is to check, did this treatment actually prompt them to use mobile money more? And, yes, it did. In the overall index, it's 0.2 standard deviations. And I show you below the chart here, what was kind of included in that index. So kind of, use in the business, how much, how much, how large were the transactions, things like that. So that did appear to be a channel towards increasing women's economic empowerment. And again, kind of below this chart, I show this to you that this empowerment index is itself a mix of several indices. So there's a lot that goes into it. It's a mix of financial control index, kind of how, questions about how the woman, does she feel pressure to share? Does she kind of have income that she can control? And also a brief game that we did where we kind of let women say, would you rather have a smaller amount of income come to yourself or a larger amount of income go to your spouse? And the premise there is if they're willing to have, more income go to their spouse, that means they kind of feel like they have some control over the household income rather than taking a lower payment to, that goes just to themselves, that kind of guarantees they can control it. So that was in there in the financial control. Also broadly in this empowerment index, we looked at kind of, does the woman need permission to, to do certain things and go certain places? When her household makes decisions, a variety of different kinds of decisions, was she involved in that? And business decisions for her business were those included in the, did she kind of get to have say in those as well? We originally hypothesized that this greater use of mobile money might lead to improved earnings for her business. It didn't lend to that. So there was kind of increased financial control, but the business did about the same. I'll just highlight a couple more things. So this overall increase in empowerment index of about 0.1 standard deviation was driven by, the biggest effect was on financial control index. So there's things like asking women, do you have income you can control? They were more willing to share with their husband in the game. So that was the biggest effect. There were also changes in the household decisions index. So they were also more likely to participate in household decisions. As I mentioned, a social cohesion, a measure of social cohesion, kind of questions about kind of, women's context outside the household, do they have people they can go to for certain needs? That went up as well. And along with the use of mobile money, total savings went up. So not just in kind of mobile money, but also, kind of just all sources together. So we think maybe what's happening is that when they're saving more in mobile money, that's just kind of increasing, their kind of overall savings goals and kind of so-called crowding in other forms of savings. There were no effects on women's overall happiness, which which I guess in some ways is a little bit of a disappointment. That we might hope that the measures of kind of increased financial control did kind of lead the women to report being happier. But I think you can also view these as kind of importantly showing that there weren't kind of decreases, and in particular discord with the spouse. It was about a 0.2. So what might be going on is that, other things being equal, of course it's a good to to kind of be able to control income more. But if there's any sort of kind of if there's any sort of downsides to that, maybe we're not seeing that in terms of the discord, at least. So to kind of, just to give the punchline, we think there've been kind of important positive impacts on women's economic empowerment of this treatment. And they importantly came with no evidence of kind of unintended negative consequences as far as backlash from spouses, or kind of hurting the woman's overall well-being, even if it didn't clearly improve. It wasn't hurt. So I'll just stop there.
Thanks so much, Rachel. That's great to hear about your study, and yeah, interesting to see another use of different way to do the measurement using indices. I had hoped we would have a little time for questions. Unfortunately, as you all know, we got started rather late and had some technical difficulties. So I think that we won't be able to get to questions. I've noted them though, and we will be following up with a blog, so perhaps we can kind of address some of those questions or some other points there. And if you stay tuned, Finequity, as I mentioned, and also that Justin mentioned, we'll be sharing out a brief with some guidance that Joanna Ledgerwoods will be leading, writing that up